That work? Did others? Recording has started. Good. All right. With that, I'm not a member of the committee, but would somebody in John's place like to call us to order?
I'd like to call the meeting to order. This is Brenda.
Thank you. With that, let's go to public comments. Are there any public comments at this time? All right, hearing none, let's move on to the first item on the agenda. The BO&C, the Budget Operations and Compensation Committee. Agenda item number 3, approval of the meeting minutes from June 8th, 2022. Is there a motion to approve those meeting minutes?
Motion to approve.
Right.
Second by
All right.
Chandy.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. All right. Moving on to the next item, the Budget Operations and Compensation Committee, agenda item number 4, the mid-year revisit to fiscal year 2023 targets and budget. In other words, the meat of what we've come to discuss today. So, as you all are aware, we like to do our targets in the spring, present the fiscal year targets to you through part of the full year budget process. You guys review it, make your recommendations to the board, but then we do a mid-year check-in. And so kind of November, December, we look at where things are programs proceeding according to plan? Are we moving in a direction of achieving those targets that we had hoped to, or not? And what are the resources that are needed to meet those? So we've done that check-in, and we're coming to you today with some proposed changes. So I'll start on the incentive programs and their targets. And the big change here is methodology, which I'll speak to. Looking at the incentive programs is comprised of 2 programs. We have our Energy Storage Solutions battery program and our Smart E program. We're not proposing any changes with Smart E. Our changes have to do with Energy Storage Solutions. And the changes here are in the way that we, when we count projects. So for all of our other programs, we've counted projects towards our goal when projects are closed. So for CPACE, that's an easy line in the sand. For PPAs, that's an easy line in the sand. For project finance deals, that's an easy thing to call because you have a closing. Documents get signed, we count it towards our targets, and boom, things go. Same thing with Smart 8, that the loan closes, we count it. Energy Storage Solutions, we had previously said, hey, we're going to only count these when they're completed. And that was, we felt that there was kind of, there was a little bit more transparency in that at the time, because it was like, hey, there's so many other factors, it's going to force us to stay on top of things a little bit more and make sure that these things are actually getting installed. What we found as we've worked this out with the other co-administrators, Eversource and UI, is our control and our influence really ends once these projects get approved and we close out the documentation. Then it's really on the utilities to make sure that they get energized and interconnected. And so we're proposing this change in methodology so that we say, hey, we're going to count projects towards our goal, and we're going to set our goals around how many projects we can approve and close out paperwork on in a year. We're still going to monitor everything in terms of completion, but we're just kind of adjusting this goal to be in line with where the Green Bank's influence starts and ends. So that's one of the big drivers here. So it's a scaling down of the number of projects by about 100 projects, 120 projects for the fiscal year. which you're saying, hey, you're going to count these earlier in the cycle, but you're going to do fewer projects. And that's also in recognition of the fact that from a residential perspective, we still have slow uptake in this market. There were just some changes approved. I believe it was last week by Pura, last week or the week prior, that we think will rapidly increase deployment. But I think that there are still players that need to come into the market fully to take advantage of that. I think it's going to have a longer run rate, and then just based off of what we're seeing, I think that doing 1,300 targets is an achievable but aggressive target. Doing 1,400 is not going to happen. But the other change on this is you say, hey, you're going from 34 million, but you're doing fewer projects to doing 97 million. And this is really driven by the commercial storage projects. And being that we're going to count those once those are approved, that number is going to go up for this year significantly. Those projects do have a much longer lead time in terms of installation, just due to all the interconnection reviews that have to happen from the utilities, and then the actual delivery and installation of the batteries from the original equipment manufacturers. So, and then the capacity number is going up in line, similar to the capital deployment, basically driven by the large number of commercial projects that we know are going to be approved by the board this year. We're expecting the board to approve. So those are the changes on the incentive program side. Any questions or concerns? Brenda?
No, I just, I think you all are doing what you know is best, so questions.
Okay. And to be clear, we will still give the board transparency around completions. We just won't be setting the targets around completed systems, as that's out of our control, but we will be able to public, how do I want to say this? If there are systemic issues that are preventing projects or slowing projects, or there are bottlenecks that are occurring, they will be transparent with our reporting. So with that, why don't we move on to the financing programs? So financing program targets. The big change here, I mean, we're not changing numbers of projects. We're not changing the amount of capital deployment, and we're not changing the capacity. I think we're on target to hit these numbers. What I wanted to do here was really clarify the CGV capital deployed. And so just to take a step back, when we say capital deployed, that's more of like the overall value of the projects that are being done. A portion of those is the Connecticut Green Bank capital. And we had some, I recognize that this is probably confusing for anybody who's not on staff, because staff gets wrapped up in these numbers sometimes. So we're trying to come up with a little bit of a better naming convention and some documents to make it a little bit more clear that we'll, of course, share with this committee. But we wanted to clarify what are the numbers that are really going to be Connecticut Green Bank capital versus third-party capital. And so on CPACE, we expect that to be $7 million from our balance sheet that we'll invest in CPACE projects, 2.7 in PPA projects, and then 3.7 in SBEA. There could be additional capital requests, as there already have been in terms of strategic investments that come through, but those will all go through the board for their review and their approval. But any questions on this?
One question from me.
Mhm.
So that means for the multifamily transportation, oh, that's zero. So there's no CGB capital on those line items, I guess.
Or we aren't budgeting anything. There could be something. Typically,
Okay.
typically the multifamily term loans haven't used Connecticut Green Bank Capital.
Mhm.
The actual loan capital comes from, or in the past has come from Capital for Change,
Uh-huh.
and we co-underwrite and work with them. Pre-dev has come off of our balance sheet, but we've really haven't been pursuing pre-development projects for a while.
Mhm.
Um, and then health and safety is health and safety money that's currently over at Inclusive Prosperity Capital that they're responsible for deploying. So it wouldn't come from our balance sheet anyway. In transportation, this was the line item that was originally added to capture some of the work that we were doing on carbon credits,
Mhm.
which doesn't really impact our balance sheet. So there isn't really any Connecticut Green Bank capital going into that. In strategic investments, there is. We haven't budgeted a number for that investment, but I know Bert's already out there investing. And I mean, you've seen some of those transactions come to the board in terms of the battery facility that we are working on with Posigen, the refinancing of the Groton fuel cell. All of those would get into that category. It's just harder to put a number around that.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? All right, so with that, I will move on to the budget. Um, so what are the big changes that we're looking at? Let's start with revenue. So we're revising up in terms of utility customer assessments. So what we receive from the utilities, from the 1 mil on electric bills, to buy 328,000. That's just kind of reflective of what we've seen thus far. And then we're revising down our Reggie proceeds because there's a statutory max that we can receive from Reggie, and we've actually hit that. I think we hit that when December, Jane.
Yes, with the December auction, we did.
So that's coming down. So that overall, those two net to a decrease in $1.6 million in operating income. So I mean, it's not a fun thing to lose that Reggie money, but I mean, we're losing the money basically because we've maxed out on it otherwise. So it doesn't feel like the worst situation in the world, shall I say.
Are other states maxing out as well prematurely?
I don't know if anybody else has a cap. I thought this was
Oh,
a Green
okay.
Bank. I think this is a Green Bank specific cap
Oh, okay,
as
gotcha.
opposed to a
Thank
state
you.
cap.
Gotcha.
So the money now gets diverted over to deep, if I remember correctly.
Oh, okay.
Yes, Eric. I think that money is to help Deep with its cheaper program for EV rebates.
Mm-hmm. So I mean,
Thanks, Bert.
it's going to a good cause at least.
Yeah, cheaper is definitely a good cause.
Yes.
Thanks, Bert.
Yes, you bet.
So with that, let's move on to expenses. So we'll start at the top with expense changes. So we have a net $150,000 addition to the budget in terms of compensation. And this is driven by shifting an employee who had been a consultant to being an employee. I think that leaves us in a much more stable position, provides a lot of continuity for the organization, and allows us to be more flexible in terms of how we use this person's time. And so I think we end up in a good position. This is actually offset by a decreasing consulting expense that's mixed in down below. So the next one on here is an increase of $205,000 in program development and administration. This is related to the further rollout of Salesforce across the organization and the build out of that. We've really been leveraging that on the financing program side. We have tapped it for energy storage solutions and partnered with our Salesforce consultant to really get it in place in time for the program launch last year. And my hat's off to them. And now it's kind of time to go back and close the gaps, figure out how we make this work more efficiently, but also it's a little bit of culture change, make sure that we're using it more across the organization as we're focusing on making sure that we're building and maintaining relationships as a way to bring projects to the Green Bank. We want more staff to have access to Salesforce, and we want to make sure that it's as efficient as possible for them to use. So that's that big driver. On item E, there's an increase of $85,000 to EM&V. 25,000 of that is to cover an ongoing project related to CPACE customer savings. This is work we've been doing for a while now with a company called Recurve. They're kind of at the cutting edge of EM&V. It's kind of a data science approach to looking at customer savings and analyzing bill data. I know we've been working with them for a while. It's as is anything when going through utility bill savings, it takes a while. But I think we're due to actually review the first round of results fairly soon. I'm really excited to see this, because it's a new use of data-driven technology, but also I think it's going to allow us to speak to the benefits of CPACE and what people are actually achieving in a new way. So we have that one item, and then the remaining 60,000 is related to an impact study that we're doing doing on the RSIP. So every other year we're required through the end of last year to report to the Energy and Technology committees in the legislature with regard to the progress of the residential solar incentive program. And we did that report to them, but we said, hey, we're going to come with a third-party administered study. And so we hired a group called Slipstream, who are one of our qualified EM&V providers. They've been working on this, and they're putting together that third-party program evaluation on RSIP that we hope to deliver, or we expect to deliver to the legislature in February. The next item on here, the next item on here is an increase in research and development. This is $520K, which looks like a huge number. And 520K is a big number, but let me walk you through what all of this includes. So on the financing program side of this research and development money, or increase, is $315,000. This is driven pretty much by the Hydrogen Task Force and the legislature's order on us to do that. So when they decided to order the Green Bank to do that, that's great. But there is a cost associated with that because we needed to bring in consultants. We needed to bring in attorneys. We needed to bring in a translator. So the majority of that are those expenses of that $315K. In that, there's also money for some work that we're currently doing, looking at the deployment of electric school buses based off of the mandate for school transportation to be electrified in the next several years. The rest of this money on R&D, it has to do with environmental infrastructure and that's really it's about 26,000 for a couple different items that are in there that are smaller. And then finally, there on the incentive programs related to batteries, we had about $180,000 that was driven by an battery end of life study and battery front of the meter deployment, which is part of Pure's order for us to assist with. So that's where those items are falling. And then you'll see this $45,000 decrease in consulting fees that's related to the what I mentioned before in terms of compensation. That's part of the, that's the offset. Any questions on the overall expense changes before I get to non-operating expenses and talk about incentives?
Yeah, that's Adrian.
Yes.
I have a hand up mostly because when you were talking about the hydrogen committee, were we not to get any kind of remuneration for that work?
There was no funding granted by the legislature for that.
Let me offer a perspective. This question came up, Adrian, in our working group conversations with the environmental NGOs. Was where did the funding for the hydrogen power study come from? And although there was nothing in the decision of Special Act 22-8 that specified where the funding would come from, underneath our definition of clean energy includes hydrogen production and other facilities. I forgot the specific language. And that definition ties to our utilization of the Clean Energy Fund, the 1 mil surcharge. So in my mind, as the legislature approved of it there, the funding for it would come from the ratepayers, and that's I'm pretty sure we wrote that up in our hydrogen power study just to bring some transparency to it, our process and where the funding came from. But yeah, good question.
Okay. Those are always heavy lifting, that kind of work, and it's too bad not to be compensated for it.
Brian's voice has a little bit of a tone of relief in it today, since the final meeting of the task force was yesterday. So,
yeah, I'll report out that the task force unanimously approved the findings and recommendations, and as you could imagine, there were very disparate voices in the process. You know, doing these types of public policy processes isn't what we do as an organization. We provide capital to families and businesses to finance clean energy. So having this obligation was pretty significant for us outside our comfort zone. Yeah, last night I slept really well, and you all are going to see a great report in the board packet next week, and we're going to present an update on the findings of that report at the next board meeting. But just we had to build a team in order to make it all work, and it, knock on wood, it worked really good. We were 6 months to do this, and I think what you'll see is a phenomenal deliverable.
Hi, Eric.
yes. Hi, John.
Hi, it's John
How are
Harris.
you?
I'm all right. I just wanted
Welcome.
to let you know that I've arrived.
I'm glad you could make it.
Yeah. All right. I'm on the mass bike, so I'm going to mute myself. Bye.
So moving on from just operating expenses to non-operating expenses in terms of incentives, or not non-operating, but just incentive changes, we have a net decrease in expenses here that offsets the rest of this of about 5.6 million. This is due to a slower deployment in battery storage for about 700,000, and then also for slower upgrades of revenue grade meters from 3G to 4G, if you recall from our previous budget conversations where we've budgeted for meter upgrades. Those are going slower than expected, so we're getting communication of less generation. It doesn't mean that there is less generation. It's just that we're not having to pay the incentives on all of that. So this is just truing up to what we've seen thus far in the year. But you can see that our rec revenue was unchanged and has been in line. So questions? Before I go in and start to talk about our Dream Big process and our Dream Big budget scenarios. All right. So, well, before I talk about IPC amendments, I'll talk about our other budget scenario. So this is all business as usual, all those fun and games. With the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act last fall, and on top of the bipartisan infrastructure bill earlier last year, and then more recently, I've heard a lot of stuff talking about the upcoming Farm Bill. There's a lot of federal funding on the horizon in various ways, shapes, and forms that are going to hit the market. We also, a lot of these are just going to be through incentives that are going to lower prices even further. We expect our financing programs to kind of close the gap on a lot of this. So we see the potential for to really ramp up deployment and to kind of partner with the market, take advantage of these incentives, and get more projects across the threshold. And so we have been going through an activity as staff to say, hey, if we really want to jump on this bandwagon and take advantage of all of this, what would we need to do that? If we want to significantly increase deployment, how do we do that? And so we really focused on 5 main pillars. So what are the products that we need? How do we promote them? What do we need from a policy perspective? Where's policy hindering us? What do we need in terms of people? And how do we leverage the places that we're in to achieve all of this? And we've gone through an exercise, and we have a series of recommendations that the board will be hearing about at the January 20th meeting. But what we're bringing here to the committee, because you haven't heard all about those, I'm going to give you kind of the high level ask here and what that means from a budget perspective. And the way that we've written the resolution is for you to recommend the business as usual and the Dream Big budget scenarios, and the Dream Big being contingent upon the board's support for that as a shift in our approach to the market. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes, it does.
Cool. So from a budget perspective, from Dreaming Big, what we're really asking for on top of this this change business as usual budget is to onboard 5 additional staff members right now. I think we have identified a need for 6, but the 6th wouldn't be in this fiscal year, but 5 additional staff members that we would look to onboard in the second half of FY22. 4 of these would be team members focused on the financing program segment, 3 on the financing programs team, 1 on the operations team with a data analytics, GIS marketing focus. So the first 3 would be out there building relationships and sourcing projects, getting those across the finish line. These projects would predominantly be CPACE and PPAs, roof leases. The 4th is we had kind of building on the work that we had an Environmental Defense Fund Climate Corps fellow do last summer, who I actually should, I love this work. I need to find a way to present it to the board. But basically, we had our fellow took a data set that we had, which is grand list from about 147 of the towns in Connecticut, and standardize that, bring that into our data warehouse, and kind of start to look at how we could use that to hyper target for building retrofits. And that got us thinking about, hey, here's a lot of other ways that we need to be using data, and we have done a lot of things in terms of marketing, but this is really one area where we haven't spent a whole lot of time and effort. So I think we'd like to do that, and I think that we should be able to pinpoint specific buildings, specific neighborhoods that are really prime for transformation, and we can then go after those and ideally really bring change that helps benefit entire communities. And then the fifth position that I haven't spoken about would be outreach focused really on our residential efforts. So focused on energy storage solutions and smarty, and helping us outwardly articulate how our financing joins with the incentives that are in the market and the incentives that are coming from Eversource and UI. And so how to really help people take advantage of everything that's out there. The next budget item for Dream Big is an additional $50,000 to help us create marketing assets that facilitate greater outreach to the public. And so what I was just talking about in terms of how do you marry, we want somebody to help us talk about how you're marrying incentives and financing. We need those marketing assets to help that person do that. So some of this is going to be licensing videos that explain what a heat pump is, but some of this is going to be how do we develop something with our colleagues at DEEP and at the utilities that really helps people kind of get to navigate their way to a solution. We have some ideas out there that's leveraging some of the data that I talked about, leveraging some of our web assets that already exist. But that's really the idea there. And then the final $50,000 would be added to our rent budget. And that's really figuring how do we bring the green bank to people and where they are? How do we get to communities? And the idea would be like, what if we did a pop-up for a specific period of time that's really focused on a community? Let's use minimal funds, but have a physical presence and have a people presence so that we can talk to people about how they cut their electricity bills, how they cut their carbon footprint, how they save money. But we would need a space to do that in. So that's kind of our thinking. It's slowly coming together, actually rapidly coming together in terms of what our thinking is. But any questions on that?
Do you think Energize CT would be interested in partnering with us on that piece?
In which piece? The last one?
Right. The marketing and pop-up.
I think it's the marketing. I mean, we're having conversations with the folks at DEEP, and I think they can help us navigate that. I mean, we certainly need to include them in what and how we're talking about things, if not the actual conversation. In terms of them going with this out in the community, it's worth a conversation. I mean, partnering with them in the past has been a hit or miss, I think. But I think that we're open to working with them and figuring out how we can best help the ratepayers save money.
Thank you.
Eric?
Yes, John?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, any money that we have available to spend on marketing is money well spent, that people still do not fully understand the programs, and that anything we can do to further explain the programs and extend them is a really good thing to do.
I agree with that. All right. So with that, I'm going to shift to a little bit of an administrative flag. So in the resolution today, there's an item that's referring to you authorizing staff to enter into PSAs for their budgeted amounts. That's the same, generally the same wording that we used last spring or last June when we did this. There was a note that we didn't, because we didn't have the meeting, we didn't call something out the right way. So we want to make sure that we are reauthorized by the committee and then the board to enter into contracts with IPC. So that's why I'm displaying the IPC PSA amounts right here. So the way that this typically reads is, what we do an RFP for anything that we're asking for your blessing on, your endorsement on. IPC is the exception, and we did not call out that exception, and that's an exception just due to the nature of our relationship in the business and the origins of Inclusive Prosperity Capital, being that they sprung out of the Connecticut Green Bank. So I just wanted to highlight for the committee and make sure that I explained that lack of an RFP process. So that's there. Hi, Madam Chair.
Hello.
So with that brings us to Resolution 2. Whereas Section 5.2.2 of the bylaws of the Connecticut Green Bank requires the recommendation of the Budget Operations and Compensation Committee of the annual budget to the Connecticut Green Bank Board of Directors. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Budget Operations and Compensation Committee of the Green Bank Board hereby recommends approval to the Board of Directors. The revised budget and targets for FY23. Secondly, the addition of the Dream Bigger strategy and budget. And then 3, that extend the professional service agreements with Inclusive Prosperity Capital for fiscal year 2023 with the amounts of each PSA not to exceed the applicable approved budget line item. Do I
So
hear a
moved.
motion?
John Harity, so moved.
Brenda,
Yes.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion passes. Thank you. With that, it brings us to our next item on the agenda, which is our is the C in BO&C, the compensation. I will be joined. I don't think Kelly's actually going to make it till sometime after 3 due to a conflict. But Kelly McDaniel has been a long time human resources consultant to the Green Bank. She's done everything from performance coaching to structural design to training suggestions. I mean, we've tapped her for a lot, and she's phenomenal. So she'll hopefully join us in a little bit and correct everything that I say. But basically, going back a couple years, well, we did an original compensation study in 2013, I believe, when we were still part of Connecticut Innovations. And our intent was to make sure that we were paying market prices so that we could attract and retain the talent that we needed. We did a new study. That original study was with Buck Consultants. We did one with Cardis Larson in 2016, 2017 with the intent of updating that in 3 to 5 years. So we did that update in 2021, and that rolled over to the start of 2022. For a variety of reasons, it just took a while to get this to the committee. It just COVID, a bunch of other things going on. We also wanted to have a more holistic view of compensation and employee satisfaction. And so we did a survey of employees, and kind of that more holistic view is what I'm bringing to the committee today to update you all on. So we've always wanted to have an approach to compensating Green Bank employees with the idea that we want to make sure that we're ensuring fairness and equity. We're maximizing employee motivation and productivity. We want to differentiate and reward our top performers. We want to align organizational goals. We want to foster goal attainment. And we want to reinforce the organization's ability to attract and retain talent. And the other one that I would add is we want to be transparent where we can be transparent. So compensation is a part of compensation and total rewards for everything that's out there. So it's not just, hey, here's your salary. There's a lot of other things that go into people's satisfaction. We realized that and that was one of the reasons that we did an employee survey. So we did as I mentioned, we did the compensation benchmarking study last year. We did the employee survey last year, and we did follow-on focus groups. So I'm going to talk about each of these efforts and kind of how we've come to this holistic picture that we've got. So we benchmarked individual positions. So we worked with Jerry Cardis over at Cardis Larson. They benchmarked positions, so they have access to several databases. They looked at the actual job duties of every job and looked through databases and basically benchmarked what our staff is making versus what the data that they have. They made sure that they had two sets of benchmarks that were in there. They looked at Hartford versus Stanford. There were a couple of things that were a little off, but nothing huge. Then everybody was within their bands. We had two managers that were kind of lower in the band when they did this comparison. It's not saying that they were earning below market. It's just they were kind of lower to their peers. But when we looked at that a little bit closer, they were kind of in line with where they should have been based off of experience. There was some disparity among associates. Again, that was more reflective of experience rather than anything systemic or design. And this recommendation from them to make those adjustments is outdated because we've had a couple of merit cycles that have gone in with that data. Moving on to the employee survey, DeLisa Group, Kelly McDaniel's team did the survey for us. The first thing to mention is we had a really high response rate that is overall, in and of itself, is indicative of a highly satisfied staff. Generally, when you have staff that are less engaged, you don't have that high of a response rate. People don't really want to take the time to tell you if they're happy or not. So overall, 88%, we were happy about that. And in terms of how people view the organization, I mean, we had an 87% favorable rate. And I still can't figure out that 3% that was really highly unfavorable, but anyway, we asked for a bunch of opinions on a number of topics. I mean, overall, like from a perspective, from overall perspective, our highest rated things were the Green Bank promotes a safe working environment. I mean, coming out of COVID, that's great to hear. We perform high quality work with 97% of staff agreeing to that. I have the flexibility I need to arrange my work so that I can meet business objectives and balance my family and personal needs. Leadership is taking the organization in the right direction. My manager gives me enough freedom to do my work. I mean, 97% of the staff agreed with that. So even if we had staff, if we go back a slide and look at how we had 11% with an unfavorable, with a neutral view, and 3% with an unfavorable view. I mean, that 3% are the only people that don't agree with these statements. It's kind of a remarkable result. In terms of the lowest items on here, the organization's performance appraisal and review process is effective. I am satisfied with the pension and retirement benefits offered to Green Bank employees. The Green Bank teams and departments work well together across the organization. The Green Bank provides appropriate compensation considering duties and responsibilities. Monthly staff meetings are beneficial, and the Green Bank demonstrates visible commitment to equity and diversity when dealing with employees. And one of the first things that Kelly flagged was on when they do these types of surveys on other organizations, typically 11% is below the number that they would see in terms of people being with any organization being dissatisfied. You typically see that in the 17 to 26% range. So it's I would consider it a little bit of a yellow item, not really a red item, but we take that on board. And so kind of coming out of this, we're looking at what we can do to really get at these items and where we can work with people. So we're doing things in terms of the review process, the performance appraisal and review process not being effective. We're bringing a lot of transparency to that. We've put more, I think, better timelines and structure around how we create goals. We're making goals much more quantitative for the organization and how those are tied back to compensation. So just in merit compensation, rather, so that people can see, hey, I'm achieving this target, therefore I'm expecting X to happen to my compensation. Not that that's the only thing that's going to influence it, but we're trying to bring that type of transparency and clarity. And we're trying to do as much, or doing things more in the open than we had in the past. I don't think we're doing anything that would violate any confidence, but I think we're much more open to talking about process than we ever were. Not that we weren't, I just think that it hadn't been prioritized. So looking at the breakdowns on compensation, so the Green Bank provides appropriate compensation considering duties and responsibilities. So who's happy, who's not? I mean, the executive team and the legal team are happy. Accounting is happy. Financing is happy. Or financing programs, there's a little bit of a split. The incentive programs, there's a little bit of a split. The investment teams, it's about 50-50. The operations team, there's a little bit of a split. I think anecdotally, I think that I think each of the managers kind of understands that. I mean, the survey was anonymous, but I think everybody has a general inkling of opinions on our teams. In terms of managers versus non-managers, we see that our lower level employees tend to be happier than our managers, but that also apparently is in line with other surveys. So following the survey, DeLisa Group conducted focus groups. Employees feel that compensation studies and grade leveling do a good job of making things fair, though it's hard to properly benchmark the unique nature of the Green Bank roles without a deep dive into what each employee does. But there is a general perception that pay is distributed equitably. While the benefits package is perceived as great, there's a sense that it's slightly eroding. And I think, I understand where that would be coming from, I think. Employees perceive that being part of a state entity means they will give up something on the pay side in exchange for great benefits and meaningful work. The concept of pay for performance and merit-based pay is vague, and employees are not able to make a strong enough connection that doing a great job means that their pay will be increased. Employees perceive very little upside monetarily for doing a great job. The goal setting process falls short of being effective. It's not meaningful or personalized. It's not cascaded. It's not challenging. It's not properly documented and measured. It's not timed properly. All of those things I think that we have addressed this year. Maybe the timing didn't quite work as much as we'd like, but we're still working the kinks out. And employees expressed interest in a variable compensation program that is closer ties to performance, as used to happen in the past. So one of the recommendations, and I mean, this is kind of when we first talked about this was prior to our budget last year. So one of the things was move from just merit to COLA and merit. That's driven primarily on where things are economically, just with inflation being where it is. There's a need to keep up with the cost of living. But one of the things that we had discussed in terms of management was that often senior staff realized that, hey, their staff wasn't going to really get any cost of living increase unless they got merit. So if they weren't getting at least the inflation rate in terms of merit, they were actually losing money. So they felt inclined to just go ahead and at least give them that in terms of merit, which is then kind of defeating the purpose of merit. So behind this recommendation is really split things out. Here's your cost of living. All employees who are in good standing get a COLA. Those that then the merit is really there to be used as a tool to incentivize and to reward performance. So that's kind of the approach that we have taken, and the way that we're really looking to roll this out, and we'll look forward to bringing something to you guys when the committee next meets, is through our more quantitative goals that are tied back to program, back to the organizational goals. So the targets that you guys just approved and recommended, those are what are going to be cascaded across the organization. And so everybody's merit will be based upon 3 factors: the organization's performance, so high level, the net of all those goals. Did we achieve them? Did we surpass them? The programs on which they work targets, were those achieved? Were those not achieved? Were they surpassed? And then anything that is cascaded down personally. Personal goals could be anything like, hey, get CPACE for new construction up and running, or make sure that invoices are processed on a timely basis, or there could be something that is very personal, or it could be something that, like from my goals in terms of making sure that we're staying on budget. So that's really kind of the approach that we're taking, and I'll bring some examples next time. At this point, I don't have any recommendations for you for you guys to consider from a compensation perspective, but I just wanted to make you all aware of what we're doing in terms of compensation, and making sure that we're trying to attract and retain talent. And now I'm joined by Kelly, who, although you didn't hear everything that I just said, you can either endorse it or tell. But basically, I just had walked through the whole compensation piece about how we had done the study, how we had done a survey of the staff, followed up with focus groups. Our big recommendation was kind of the move that we made last summer to go to COLA plus merit, so that we have a tool to make sure that employees are staying in line with the market, but then we're also rewarding performance with the other piece. And that we'll continue to look at where we need to be in terms of salary structure, kind of going forward. And I expect that there will be something that we bring to the committee in the spring. Yeah, then the overall merit, we were looking to be more transparent and quantitatively driven. For the committee, are there questions or concerns?
No questions or concerns, but I just think that we're in an environment where employees feel that they have a bit of an advantage, and we're experiencing some of the same issues with folks challenging or questioning our evaluation process. So just wanted to share that, we're brothers and sisters in the same type of situation.
Mm-hmm. Other questions or concerns? All right. Well, I thank you all for your time today and for your recommendations to the board. And I look forward to speaking with you next week at the board.
Thank you. And this has been emailed, right? The report?
Yeah, there was a summary of the reports. It was
Okay. Thank you very much.
all right. With that,
Okay.
sorry, Adrian, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you for this presentation. Do we have to do anything about the
There-
recommendation?
There is no recommendation on compensation, so there's nothing. I'm not looking for any action from the
Okay.
committee at this. Okay. All right. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Awesome. So moved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye
Thanks,
all.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
evening. Bye-bye.
Good job, Eric.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was tough stuff.